gentlemen, the Hall of Fame has gotten one right. And I don't mean they've never gotten one right before, but I'm saying this time the good guy wins. To a nicer guy, it couldn't happen. Mark Henry is going in the WWE Hall of Fame. And I am wholeheartedly behind that because I've known Mark since he showed up there for 22 years or whatever. And I've always said that Mark had to work harder to redeem himself from his initial outings and his initial tenure in the business because they screwed him around first 2 or 3 years, putting him in the ring with no real experience on pay-per-view. His first match was on pay-per-view against Jerry Lawler. Yes. So it was okay. But, in front of people, a first match on pay-per-view, and then he got hurt in training and he was out a year, and then they couldn't decide what they wanted him to do. But after a few years, when he got sent down here to OVW, which I think he'll probably say was one of the best things that happened to him early in his career, because he got to be not only he got his basics finally. And Tom Pritchard had worked with him a while in the warehouse, but, for God's sake, he got his basics and he understood more about the business and the psychology of the business. And he got to work with and become one of the boys. He got to be one of the boys because the guys were looking at him from the time he started because of his big contract and that he had been an Olympic athlete. And he didn't really understand the locker room of the business in his early years, which is why, there was a few issues. But once he settled in, think about it. Who's been a more model employee who's always overexcelled, even when they gave him something screwy to do or didn't know what to do with him? One time they sent him down to OVW wanting him to lose weight, because he was like 460 or whatever. And I think he got down to like 392 and was doing leapfrogs and taking monkey flips just because he was so athletic. And they brought him back up. And the first thing they had him do was put on weight to go to the Arnold Classic and break the powerlifting record or whatever. So he put back on like 50 pounds. Because they were schizophrenic with him so bad. But he learned his promos. He learned to work, especially for a big man match and being that kind of an athlete. He was gold on personal appearances and being an ambassador for the company. He never gets in trouble. There's never anybody say anything bad about Mark, right? So all in all, as Buddy Rogers says to a nicer guy, it couldn't happen. This time I'm proud to see our old friend Mark go in the Hall of Fame. I can say something good for once about somebody.
I always felt that WWE really handled him so poorly the majority of the time he was there. He's a guy who I think if he was in the territories could have done really well. He ended up He ended up being a good promo. He was the world's strongest man. He could work a strongman match, and they fucked him around left and right until they finally just stopped fucking around with him because they had no more choice. Yeah. They were trying to get him to quit for years, weren't they?
At a point or two, I think there was, but that was early on. I don't think they were wanting to get him to quit later on with some of the things they did with him. I think they actually thought it would be good. But the thing about Mark, as you said, in the territories, and people are going to take this as a racist statement, but I'll explain why it's not in a minute for all you people who really actually have to have it explained. He would have been a black Andre the Giant. He would have been a touring attraction that came in as a special partner or a special surprise or a battle royal competitor or in some big mega showdown with another giant in every main event in every territory all across the country in the 70s. If you deposited Mark Henry in his prime speaking and working into the territories in the 70s, he would have probably made more money per capita in those days than he might have made in the WWF when you adjust it for inflation. He would have been huge with a guy that could be babyface or heel. He could be a babyface in Cleveland like Ernie Ladd, and he could be a heel in Los Angeles like Ernie Ladd at the same time. It would, so yeah, but just with his look and his physical ability alone, and if you had a hot manager, well, you could have had a traveling manager with him at some point also, probably, if he was a heel or if he's a babyface. He was so good he could do his own shit. He could do his own shit either way, but you know what I'm saying.
What was it like, though? I mean, here he is. He comes out of the Olympics. He signs that huge contract, which at the time, it was somewhat ridiculous. They signed him to that contract, and then a few years later, they sent him to OVW. What was that like for him, do you think, to be sent down to OVW at that time?
Well, I think actually at first he didn't understand, but once he'd been here for a little while, then he kind of got it. And then he really stayed. At first he came in not wanting to do autographs with the sponsors unless he got, paid for it. And after a few months, he was buying an air conditioner for the locker room for the rest of the boys, because he saw, okay, here's what these guys are having to go through. I bypassed some of that. And it changed because he had been trained backwards. His first match was on pay-per-view. So, but once he got it, he was great to work with. And he didn't have heat with anybody. And he was equally good at being a baby face for us or as being one of the big monster heels. And I think, he learned to appreciate it when he saw what it did for him as far as just everybody's attitude toward him in the locker room and in the office. And then he could get over again the right way because he started off on a bit of a wrong foot.
If you had a territory, you're booking a territory, do you bring him in as a heel or a babyface?
Depends on what territory. Once again, if he's in the South, if he's in Georgia or Mid-South where there's a huge African-American population, you probably want him to be a babyface. But also he had the ability to be a heel, so he could go and be a heel in places where it would probably take better. It was somebody like that, just like Ernie Ladd did. And Mark Henry looked up to guys like Ernie Ladd, who were multi-sport guys, but were, major names in wrestling and smart guys in wrestling. And he also, Mark Henry's strength coach was Terry Todd, who had worked with Paul Anderson years ago. When he was the world's strongest man in the 50s and got into wrestling. So he knew what was going on eventually once he got into it and he could immerse himself in it.
Did he get to know Ernie Ladd at all? Because Ernie was still alive and he was around the WWF a little bit from time to time.
I don't know. They may have met a time or two. He used to get a kick out of me when I'd do my Ernie Ladd also. Mark Henry, you've dumbed yourself right out of position. You're stealing from Ohio Valley Wrestling. But anyway, I'm glad to see Mark being indicted, as they say, into the Hall of Fame. It partially makes up for Kid Rock, at least.
Well, let's not go crazy, but yeah, certainly well deserved.
Did you see the fucking logo or the meme or whatever somebody put out on Twitter, the Hall of Fame induction latest photo of Kid Rock, and it's like that fucking Cletus from goddamn from where the fuck is it, from The Simpsons or wherever the fuck he's from, goddamn.